Unit 25, Field Research 2. Contents 25.1 Introduction, 25.2 Genealogy, 25.3 Interview, its types and process, 25.4 Feminist and Postmodernist perspectives on interviewing, 25.5 Narrative analysis, 25.6 Interpretations, 25.7 Case study and its types, 25.8 Life Stories, 25.9 Oral History, 25.10 PRA and BRA Techniques, 25.11 Conclusion. Learning objectives. It is expected that after reading the Unit 25, you would be able to discuss the field methods described in Unit 25, subsequently select and use some of them in your mini research project. 25.1 Introduction. Unit 25 deals with some of the techniques and methods which qualitative researchers use in their pursuit of data collection. Undoubtedly, field research has always been conducted as a matter of personal style. Clammer had once pointed out that many Indian anthropologists widely practiced the drawing up of inventories of customs in response to list of queries of the kind given in notes and queries, but such encyclopedism has now almost universally disappeared, and Clammer mentioned four basic sources to styles in the practice of field-based research, namely 1. The individual and idiosyncratic characteristics of individual field worker, ideological and philosophical assumptions, the general conception of method, the nature of problem being studied. You will not find all researchers using all the methods and techniques discussed in Unit 25. Depending on the sources of the personal style, and a particular researcher may or may not use a method or technique. It is a good idea for you to get familiar with most common methods and techniques of qualitative research. With this notion in mind, we are going to discuss such methods and techniques as genealogy, interview, case study, life history, oral history, and PRA/BRA techniques. We begin the discussions with genealogical method. 25.2 Genealogy. One specialized method to study kinship, family, and marriage is by use of genealogies, which are prepared using the techniques of observation and interview. W.H.R. Rivers showed the importance of genealogy in social and cultural studies and delineated the procedure of drawing up genealogical data. See box number 25.1 on the early realizations of the importance of genealogical method in social research. Malinowski defined genealogy as a synoptic chart of a number of connected relations of kinship. The investigator traces the genealogy chart of the respondent, called ego, by making queries from him. However, he may not place all his relatives in the right birth order, of his memory of them may be faulty. Thus, the field worker completes the genealogy seeking information from other respondents. The genealogical chart, however, may not be completed because people may not remember their ancestors, their names, and other details about them beyond a certain number of generations. The problem of remembering is bound to multiply in societies where descent is traced from both sides. Box 25.1 Relevance of genealogical method for social research. In 1904, Haddon suggested that a new approach to field research should involve exhaustive study of limited groups of people, tracing all the ramifications of their genealogies in the comprehensive method adopted by Dr. Rivers for the Torres Straits Islanders and for the Todas. Rivers' work among the Toda had pioneered this approach, and his example was followed by C.G. and B.Z. Zillingman among the Vedda and A.R. Ratcliffe Brown in the Andamanese. The above excerpt is a quotation from Urey's article on a history of field methods, and it shows a clear bias to intensive field research in single communities. Not only do field workers prepare genealogies, but also the people whose chart they prepare may also keep an account of their kins and affinal relatives. The kinship chart, therefore, is an analytical tool as well as an assembly of rules according to which the actors are expected to behave. In societies where writing technology has made inroads, kinship charts that hitherto existed as part of the oral traditions are now being written down. Some societies have specialized groups of genealogists who drive their livelihood by charging their clients for keeping their kinship and marriage records. The fact of kinship and marriage that are relative to the researchers may not hold the same importance for the people. Thus, the charts that people prepare for their purposes are different from those that field workers prepare their sustained interviewing and observation. According to Fortius 1949, the kinship chart that actors prepare may be called pedigree, whilst the one the field worker prepares as part of his data, depending upon his research interest, may be known as genealogy. Genealogical data are used for a variety of purposes apart from that of the studies of kinship. Demographers use genealogical statements. Migratory histories of people can also be studied throughout this method. Genealogy also facilitates the process of rapport establishment with people. Reflections and Actions 25.1. Read Unit of ESO 12 of IGNOS BA Sociology program to learn how to make genealogical diagrams. Then prepare a genealogical chart of your own family with a generation depth of at least 3 generations before you and a horizontal spread of all relationships arising out of marriages. In preparing the chart, note the name, sex, occupations, and dwelling place of the persons whose detail you are noting down. Next, find out accurately as possible when and where the person was born and where the person had lived. Note the names of each of the person's spouses, whether or not the marriage is still alive, and a record in each case where the marriage began and where and when it ended. If it is not still extant, note down the spouse dates and place of birth and where the spouse lives now, or date and place of spouse death. Information of births, marriages, and deaths is likely to be more precise. Distinguish between social filtration at birth from filiation acquired by adoption of foster age. The very purpose of making this chart is going to provide you a learning experience. After completing the chart, you may study it in order to find out about the pattern of territorial spread of your family, its occupational pattern and types of martial unions, average age at marriage, the pattern of male and female longevity, and so on. It would be interesting for you to compare your chart and findings on its basis with a similar document prepared by fellow learners of MSO 2002 at your study center. 25.3 Interview, its types and process. Interview is usually defined as a conversations with the purpose of gathering information. There is, however, a difference between everyday conversations and interview, with the latter being an unequal situations in which usually the researcher decides and controls the talk, either directly or indirectly. Interview is based on the assumption that the respondents' verbal descriptions are a reliable indicator of behavior, meanings, attitudes, and feelings, and that the stimuli, the questions, are a reliable indicator of the subject of the study. It is a two-way process in which both the interviewer and the respondent have a mutual view of each other, engaging in interactive situations, communicate ideas, and in incipient relationship emerges between the two. Interview is an effective method of collecting information from certain types of assumptions, particularly when investigators are interested in understanding the perceptions of participants or learning how participants to come to attach certain meanings to phenomena or event. In such situations, interviewing provides a useful means of access. Unlike observation, it is less time consuming and one can collect data pertaining to intangible things. Interview is also a flexible tool that can be used to gather additional information on the spot that has not been predetermined. One can catch lies and contradictions easily by watching gestures and cues. Taking interview is preceded by preparing a list of questions on the topics relating to the research problem. This list is known as interview guide. It is used as a ready reference by the interviewer to cover as many issues as possible in a limited period of time. It's fine to have a ready reckoner with you for an interview, but this may in some ways restrict the flow of information. For this reason, many researchers like to use different types of interview schedules. We may discuss the type of interview on the basis of a number of criteria. See box number 2.5, 25.2 on criteria of type of interview. Box 25.2 criteria of types of interview. The first criterion is the degree of predetermination and the questions asked. These include formal questionnaires through a standard agenda and checklist questions cropping up in the middle of the interview. A second criteria is the degree of directiveness. This includes the directions of questions from a neutral to the most specific questions on a particular subject. The third criterion is linked to the second. It is the degree of openness or closeness of the questions asked. For example, how are you versus are you not going to school today? The fourth criterion is the length of the interview, that is a brief encounter versus in-depth inquiry. A fifth criterion is of prior arrangement, fixing an interview by appointment. Sixth criterion is the interview setting, group versus 2-person, subjects precedence, ethnographer's house, neutral location, and so on. The above excerpt is based on Kemp and Allen. After looking at different criteria, let us now discuss type of interview. Types of interview. Interview are generally classified into three types, namely structured interview, unstructured interview, semi-structured interview. We will now deal in some details with each type of interview. Structured interview. This type of interview uses a formally structured schedule of interview questions. The rationale is to offer each subject approximately the same stimulus so that the responses to the questions ideally are comparable. They are designed to elicit information using set of predetermined questions that are expected to elicit the subject's thought, opinion, and attitude about certain issues depending on the study. Unstructured interview. There is no formal question schedule in this type of interview. Interviewers being with the assumptions that they do not know in advance what the necessary questions are. They also assume that not all subjects will necessarily find equal meanings in the like word questions. The interviews must develop, adapt, and generate questions and follow-up props appropriate to the given situations and the central purpose of the investigation. Unstructured interviews allow researchers to gain additional information about various phenomena they observe by asking questions. Semi-structured interview. This type of interview involves the implementation of a number of predetermined questions or only predetermined topics. These questions are typically asked in each interview in a systematic and consistent order, but the interviewers are allowed the freedom to digress, to probe far beyond the answers to their prepared and standardized questions. To determine which type of interview format to use, you must consider the kind of questions you want to ask and the sort of answers you expect to receive. The nature of the question, direct or indirect, open or close-ended, long or short, will depend upon the nature of the study. Interview process. It is also relevant to understand about the interview process. Interviews frequently begin with the open-ended questions such as demographic questions, general questions that may be essential for developing rapport between the interviewers and subject. Questions concerning to the central focus of the study may be placed together or scattered throughout the schedule. Extra questions, that is, those questions equivalent to the certain essential ones but worded slightly different, are asked in order to check the reliability of responses. Probing questions provide a way to draw out more complete stories from subjects. Probes frequently ask questions to elaborate on what they have already answered in response to a given question. The investigator must convince the subjects about the importance of the survey. One must convince subjects what they have to say is important. A list of questions may help the flow of interview and come in handy when conversation grind to a halt. One should cultivate appropriate conversation style, sitting, proposition, and my moments. During the interview, if the conversation touches the low ebb, It should be rekindled by indicating that you know something. You offer opinion or provide a calculatedly wrong assertion so that the respondent is motivated to air his views and opinions. In case of a stagnating conversation, you should push with an appropriate probe. Probing is an art which has to be cultivated. One should not interrupt the respondent accidentally, but if it is come to be done, it should be done gracefully. Questions should be clarified by the use of non-verbal stimuli such as artifacts, show cards, pictures, or even photograph. A certain focus is required to control the situations in all stages of interview. See box number 25 and 3 for some tips that can help you during the interview. Box 25.3 Helpful tips for conducting an interview. Begin an interview with small talk to establish a rapport. Be dressed appropriately and present a neutral front. Interview in a comfortable place. Be aware, appreciate, respectful, and cordial to the respondent. Do not be satisfied with monosyllabic answers. Never forget the purpose of your interview. In many interview situations, one-to-one interviewing is often not possible, especially in villages, in tea shops, or in slums where interactions are held in public view. Often the researchers find the individual interviewing turning into a group interview where others surrounded the two interject and supplement answers. Group interviews are advantageous, especially if one is seeking public information, for instance, on the water crisis or sanitation in a slum, etc. 25.4 Feminist and Postmodernist Perspective on Interviewing. We are here adding two different perspectives on interviewing for your use and as and when you may find either of both useful for your mini research project. The feminist perspective on interviewing. The feminist methodology rejects the assumption that the manifesting a strict separations between the researcher and the researched produces a more valid object account. One way in which the feminists avoid treating their subject as the mere objects of knowledge is to allow the respondent to talk back to the investigator. Its aim is building up more from the sharing between the researchers and his respondent. In order to do this, the researchers need to interview in a way that allows the exploration of completely articulated aspects of human's experience. Anne Oakley's feminist paradigm for interviewing, seeking to minimize objectifications of the subject as a data by viewing the interview as an interactional exchange. In her framework, answering the questions of interviews personalizes and humanizes the researcher and places the interactions on more equal footing. The meaning of the interview to both the interviewer and the interviewee and the quality of interactions between the two participants are all salient issues when a feminist interviews women. Oakley also pointed out that interactive interviewing is an approach that documents women's own accounts of their experience, allows the sociologists to garner knowledge not simply for the sake of knowledge but for the women who are providing information. Traditionally and qualitatively, researchers have conducted interviews that are open-ended and intensive, seeking to avoid structuring the interactions in terms of the researcher's perspective. But eliciting useful accounts is much more than encouraging women to talk. Most members of a society learn to interrupt their experience in terms of dominant language and meaning, and women have trouble talking about their experience. What researchers can do is to take responsibility for recognizing how the concept we have learned as socially may distort the women's accounts. We can return to activities conducted in specific setting as the source of our student studies and ground of re-interviewing in accounts of every activity, in accounts of how particular women accurately spend their time at home, for example, rather than previously defined concept of housework. Since work available do not fit, women learn to translate when they talk about their experiences, and as they do so, parts of their lives disappear because they are not included in the language of the account. In order to recover these parts of women's lives, researchers must develop methods for listening around and beyond words. The postmodernist perspective on interviewing. The postmodernist interview involves the sharing of personal and social experience of both respondents and researchers who tell their story in the context of a developing relationship. In this process, the distinction between the researcher and the subject gets blurred. We also view researchers' disclosure as more than tactics to encourage respondents to open up. The feelings, insights, and stories that researchers bring to the interactive encounter are as important as are those of respondents. Thus, our work focuses on interview process, the stories and feelings that both respondents and researchers share in the interview, and the understanding that emerges during interaction. Interactive interviewing requires considerable time, multiple interview sessions, and attentions to communications and emotion. It is also may involve the participating in shared activities outside the formal interview situation. Our approach is flexible and continually guided by the ongoing interactions between the interview context. Participants engaged in this kind of research must be open to vulnerability and emotional investment while working through the intricacies of sensitive issues. The interactive interviewing reflects the way of relationship develop in real life. As conversations where one person's disclosures and self-probing invite another's disclosures and self-probing were an increasingly intimate and trusting context makes it possible to reveal more of ourselves and to probe deeper into another's feeling and thoughts. Where listening to and asking questions about another's plight led to a greater understanding of one's own, and where the examination and comparison of experience offer a new insight to both lives. This intersubjective process provided a contextual basis of a level of understanding and interpretation that is not present in traditional hierarchical interview situations where interviews reveal little about themselves, aloofly ask questions in one or two brief sessions, and have little or no relationship with respondents. Feminists have called for researchers to acknowledge their interest and sympathies. They have also questioned the separation of the researcher and the respondent and viewed research as a properly ascribing to the goals of empowerment, consciousness raising, and improvement of life circumstances. Moving away from the traditional research model, interpretatives encourage self-disclosures on part of the researcher. Researcher involvement both helps respondent feel more comfortable sharing information and closes hierarchical gap between researchers and respondent. The traditional researchers encourage interviews becomes narrators who improvise stories in response to researchers' questions, props, and stories. Reflections and Actions 24.2. Make a team of 3 fellow learners of MSO 2 at your study center, and each member of the team needs to select one of the 3 types of interview methods for interviewing a teacher or his choice on the subject of reforms in the examination system at open and distance learning institutions. Each team member is to prepare a short note about 500 words on the basis of her or his finding. Each member is to then explain in oral presentations before other learners of MSO 002 at one of the counseling sessions of this course the difference in finding due to the difference in the way the interview was conducted in each case. 25.5 Narrative Analysis. Narrative analysis seeks to analyze narratives, events, viewpoints of subjects. Thus, 1999 has discussed contemporary methods used in narrative analysis. See Box 25.4 on different techniques of collecting verbal data. Box 25.4 3 techniques to collect verbal data used in narrative analysis. In her article on narrative analysis, Das has mentioned 3 techniques to collect data. 1. Narrative techniques. It facilitates an exploration of variations in the life of historians of people in similar social settings. In the life histories of peoples in similar social settings. Here the narrative is linear and oriented, and the focus is on a single event or a sequence of events that occur in a person's life. Amplificatory technique. In this technique, the person narrating the life history gets the opportunity to present the story of her or his life around the events which are most important in the eyes of that person. Elicitory interview. This technique is used for testing a hypothesis. With this purpose, the researcher focuses on eliciting information. Narratives collected through interactions with subjects are not always enough and to have supplemented by additional data. In analyzing narratives, one should be able to read between the lines and also investigate the various situations that made a subject respond to a certain questions in a certain way. It is subject positioning that constitute the types of responses one elicit from them. For example, a war widow might vent her anger at the government for not caring for her needs because she is economically unable to support herself, while another from an established background might dismiss such aids as unnecessary. When subjects refuse to respond, it does not mean that they do not have an opinion. At the same time, one should always take into account the fact that opinion might be formed at the spot when the subject had never thought about any before. In such cases, the responses would be influenced by the nature of the ongoing situation. Data collected should not always be the amount to the words that are spoken, but also should be the summing up of observation, attitudes, various records, and respondents' views. The production of truth is questionable, as there are specific kinds of truth produced by a specific kind of epistemology. Each silences also have their own narratives, and one should be aware of the responses made to fulfill certain subject functions. 25.6 Interpretation. Interpretations requires more care than asking questions. The respondent's answer is to be situated relationally, meaning as reside in the cultural context. Certain answers may be offered as a matter of mere courtesy and may not have anything to do with accuracy. Some answers may be given due to impatience, others still due to political and moral and other social constraints. As Kemp and Allen have said, one way of approaching the problems of interpretation is systematically envisage all possible questions or interpretations of questions that might have elicited the actual answers you get. Interpretation also involves the understanding of the power dynamics that structure the interactions between the interviewer and the subject. One should be aware of the various kind of circumstances and situations that elicit certain types of response. Silence and subject refusal have their own interpretations and should be read as meaningful data, for it is not only spoken words that have meanings but also gestures, attitude, cues, and silence or denials. 25.7 Case study and its type. Case study method involves systematically gathering enough information about a particular person, social setting, events, or a group to permit the researchers to effectively understand how it operates or functions. Case study is not actually a data gathering technique, but a methodological approach that incorporates a number of data gathering measures. The approach of case studies ranges significantly from general field studies to the interview of a single individual or a group. Case studies may focus on an individual, a group, or an entire community and may utilize a number of data technologies such as histories, documents, oral histories, in-depth interviews, and participant observation. Case studies can rather point in their focus or can approach a broad view of life and society. For example, an investigator may confine his examination to a single aspect of individual's life, such as studying a medical student's actions and behaviors in medical school. One must determine the area of social life to be studied according to the nature of the problem. When examining an individual case study, a similar type of assessment must be undertaken. A single lengthy interview may be sufficient, or several interviews may be required to be supplemented with the field notes during observation, copies of journal or diary entries from the subject, or other forms of documentation. Several reasons may make it necessary for a broader and more sweeping investigations on all aspects of an individual's social life, as they are interconnected and one cannot be adequately understood without a considerations of the others. Types of case study. According to Yin and Vincent, there are three types of case studies: exploratory, explanatory, and descriptive. In exploratory case studies, fieldwork and the data collection may be undertaken before defining a research question. This type of study may be seen as a prelude to a large social scientific study. Explanatory. This type of study seeks an explanation of certain phenomena and is useful when conducting studies, particularly in the complex studies of organization or communities. Descriptive. This type of study requires the investigator to present a descriptive theory which establishes the overall framework of the investigator to follow throughout the study. Before beginning research, the investigators must determine exactly what is the unit of analysis in the study will be. What distinguishes case studies from more general and ethnographic reportage is the detail and particularly of the account. Each case study is this description of specific configuration events in which a particular set of actors have been involved in some defined situations at a particular point of time. In setting out a case study, the analyst must decide in advance at what point to enter the ongoing flow of events and what point to withdraw from it. It should emphasize on the theoretical connections between the events rather than the events themselves. Any techniques can be used for the collection of data, and it is preferable to operate with social fields, since data beyond what is strictly germane to this purpose are redundant. While on this notion of social fields, let us also mention Gluckman's concept of extended case method, which Van Velsen calls situational analysis. The extended case method refers to the researcher's collection of detailed material of a particular sort. It also entitles the specific use to which the such field material is put, while the ethnographer analyzes the same. Methodology sociologists and anthropologists have used extended case method or situational analysis to discuss conflict as a normal aspect of social change. See box number 25.4, the Van Velsen even views on the use of extended case method and situational analysis. Box 20.5, Jevons Velsen on the extended case method and situational analysis. I have outlined methods of analysis and fieldwork from the comparison of episodically collected customs through the more modest and sociologically more fruitful structural method with its emphasis on social morphology, to a method that aims at analyzing the interrelations of structural regularities on the one hand and the actual unique behavior of individuals on the other. Although I am of the opinion that the fieldworker's theoretical approach is of primary importance with regard to the type of material he seeks, and although I think that the fieldwork methods can be prescribed only in a general terms, I have made some suggestions regarding the collection of the type of material that is most likely to be satisfy the demands of some of the present theories. These demands are of a synchronic analysis of general structures principles that is closely interwoven with the diachronic analysis of the operations of these principles by specific actors in specified situations. Case study method is now not a new style of data gathering and analytical technique. The field of medicine and psychology, for example, by their very nature requires physicians and psychologists to examine the patients case by case. Case studies are commonly used in business and law curriculum to help students bridge the gap between the fundamental studies and the practice. The use of diaries and biography is a popular method used by some feminists and other social scientists. Approximate this case study method: The Professional Thief by Edward Sutherland, The Jack Roller by Cliff Arshaw, and Being Different, the autobiography of Jane Ferry by Bogdan are some of the examples of classic case studies. Reflections and Actions 25.3. While explaining the explanation of case method in this field, Lowe Epstein treated law as a complex social phenomena concerned with a series of problems with which all human groups would appear to be confronted and for which situation must be devised, and showed how the case method employed both as a field techniques and as a tool for analysis and applied in different ways may serve to illuminate these problems. The discussion have concentrated on law as a body of rules, as a set of procedures of inquiry and adjudications, and as an instrument of social control. Epstein makes a further point about law that it may also be regarded as embodying a system of values. Moreover, as a social institution, it is itself subject to evaluation. We are concerned here with the basic assumptions of or postulates what undermine the social life of a community and the way in which the task and the purpose of law may be perceived. In light of what Epstein has said above, provide a case in the field of law culled from any source of sociological inquiry or any case described in newspaper report, and explain how that particular case exhibits the features of case method as explained by Epstein. 25.8 Life Histories. The life history approach to social search and theories subsumes several methodological techniques and types of data. These include case studies, interviews, and use of documents including letters, diaries, and archival records, oral histories, and various kinds of narratives. It was used extensively in the 1920s and 30s and was identified with Chicago School, but later an increased use of quantitative techniques coupled with the survey data collection led to a relatively decrease in the life history of approach. In 1970, however, there began a resurgence of interest in life history research, not only in USA but also in Europe. The main assumptions of this approach are that the actions of the same individual and groups are simultaneously emergent and structured, and that the individual and group perspective must be used for analysis. Thus, any materials that serve those perspectives can and should be regarded as essential to the empirical study of social life. The first such study was Tom's and Snakes, the Polish peasant in Europe and America. In this 5-volume, 2,200-page book, they presented almost 800 pages of life history data in support of their conclusions and generalization. Those data included newspaper article, letters to the family members, record from courts and social work agencies, and a 300-page biography of one person as a representative case. This approach was used in research on race relations, delinquency, mass media, migration, occupation, and other issues centered primarily in the fields of ethnic and urban studies. Current uses of life history display considerable variation as well as more precise conceptual distinctions. Terms such as life story, bibliography, discourse history, oral history, personal experience, narrative, collective narratives, and sagas are now distinguished from one another, and frameworks for linking types of verbal accounts to a type of generalizations have been developed. It is now common to regard life histories as a legitimate form of data, though the propositions contained in the narrative theory researchers have developed that what is called the narrative interview. This approach focuses on establishing events sequence across the life course on the business basis of interview data. Bertram 1981 has long been the advocate of the life history approach. The collaborative research on social movements in 1990 used life history data from the members of students' movement in USA and England, Ireland, Italy, West Africa, West Germany, and France. He shows the applications of this method is in large-scale comparative research project. Dolby Star, a folklorist, has developed a variation of the life history approaches she called literary folklorist, which focuses on personal narrative data. She uses the reader response theory to develop an interpretative method for studying the interdependence of personal narratives, stories, and the collective narratives, ethnic group folklore. The assumptions of this approach is that personal and collective narratives are inherently connected, and thus a personal story has a collective dimension. Interpretative biography is designed to study the turning point of or problematic situations people find themselves in during transition period. The basic questions he has concern how people can give meaning to their lives and capture more those meaning in written narratives and moral forms. In the Indian context, Dalit sociology is making use of the life histories of selected untouchables. The scheduled castes have constructed those writings of untouchables, be it poem, short story, biography, or autobiography, lives that have the essential elements of social and economic liberation. The life history of Mulia Dalit, written by Freeman, provides an insight into the nature of caste oppression in Indian society. According to the author, many incidents in his life showing striking similarities with events in other cultures, and his ways stands as an indictment of stratified systems like caste and others. 25.9 Oral history. Most contemporary social scientists make the use of written and oral sources for documentations and substantiations in social research. Diaries, letters, written document, personal papers, autobiographies and biographies, archival material, and today even films, advertisement, news, fictions, creative art form like dance, music, and painting, etc. are used as text. The later forms of text are constructed by field workers based on their first-hand information collected in various research by interviews asking people to write down about themselves or collecting life histories. Anthropologists have long adopted this method of elucidating, especially in societies where no written records existed. Oral historians are less focused on whole life and more focused on the type of or a part of life. Besides contributing significantly the history data previously collected, this method can be used to give voice to minority group to pay attention to the minds of great individuals or to permit inclusion of usually silenced groups in a population like Dalits, women, tribal, the disabled, etc. And it has even been used as a form of therapy. Historians today are making use of oral histories to supplement historical understanding. Feminists especially insisted on using oral histories of women to recast histories. Subaltern school historians have used this method of reconstructing histories of peasant movements and protests. 25. 10 PRA and RRA techniques. Organizations which adhere to participatory paradigm. Very often NGOs have developed a number of techniques for effective interactions with communities. Two of them are rapid rural appraisal and participatory rural appraisal. Rapid rural appraisal are developed in response to the disappointments and criticism of the assumptions upon which earlier development work was based. RRA and PRA are two closely related families of approaches. They emphasize a reorientations in the relationship between the outsider and the subject of dimensional activities and research. Thus, a reciprocal learning process in the relationship has replaced the one-way transfer of know-how ideas. The term PRA describes a growing family of approaches and methods to enable local people to share, enhance, and realize their knowledge of life and conditions to plan and to act. PRA flows from the owns much to the activities. Participatory research, ecosystem analysis, applied anthropology, field research on farming systems, and rapid rural appraisal. In RRA, information is more excited and extracted by outsiders. In PRA, it is more shared and owned by local people. One most important principle is use your own best judgment at all times, which implies improvisation. The distinctions between RRA and PRA has been described by Robert Chambers. PRA leads to learning by outsiders in a cost-effective way. PRA, on the other hand, enables rural people to unravel and analyze their own situation in a way they do not normally do, and in optimal cases to plan and act on their own premise. Both RRA and PRA have been referred to as a data economing or data optimizing approaches. The experience gained with PRA during the first year of application 19 showed that it is susceptible to the criticism that it had developed quickly and dirty development work and development tourism. Participatory assignments and activities are methods for creating a dialogue and collecting information. They are characterized by ingenuity and the flexibility, and the methods to be applied depend on the specific context. PRA techniques have provided to be the much used in diagnosing specific problems and highlighting the possible situation. Here is a catalog of the selected participatory rural appraisal method, techniques, and tools. Review of secondary resource, direct observation, key indicators, semi-structured interview, ranking and scoring, construction analysis of maps, models, and diagrams, diagramming, case studies and stories, drama, games, and role plays, possible future and scenario workshops, triangulation, continuous analysis and reporting, participatory planning, budgeting, monitoring, evaluation, and self-service, do it yourself. In PRA, technique essentially complements more formal methods. More often than not, these techniques are preliminary exercises. They generally serve the purpose of dialogue with people, information generation, analysis in some cases, and mobilization of people around certain issues like land rights, water, public distribution, etc. Since the NGO involved multidisciplinary teams, the PRA exercise takes a multidisciplinary perspective. The practitioners themselves have recognized three major dangers, weaknesses, and challenges of using PRA: rate of spread, practitioner aptitude, and backsliding. The speed of spread must not exceed the capacity for individual institutions to conduct social and organizational experiments to discover what is most appropriate for them. The practitioner's personal attitudes are difficult to control. The problems of not reaching all interest group persist, especially among women, the landless, ethnic minorities, the poorest, etc. High level planning targets disrupt the bottom up demands and desires. PRA does not produce the final answer, it is a process that contributes to a better understanding of the situation. Reflections and Action 25.4. Read carefully the following experts from the Schoenhood and discuss the merits and demerits of PR and RR approaches to field research. Explore the possibility of carrying out a one-day experience of applying the method to gain quick understanding and access to school education by girl children of your neighborhood. If not on this topic, you may select some other topics to carry out a one-day PRA exercise in order to get a feel of this method. There is an from Michael Schoenhood's article on negotiating with knowledge and development interfaces, anthropology and the cost for participation. From my experience, if used in a culturally suitable way, visualizing tools can be extraordinarily useful for the outsider as a means of gaining quick pictures of the local situations and people from being objectives. These pictures provide an excellent basis and act as a catalyst for elucidating discussions on local features, local knowledge, local new views and reality within homogeneous group and between different groups. On a methodological level, anthropology could profit from making more use of visual cues to focus group discussions and to elicit culture's map of reality. Research results which are normally analyzed at home by the anthropologist after fieldwork could be discussed and corrected in the field with the local people. 25.1 Conclusion. Unit 25, we discuss some of the common methods which sociologists or anthropologists use during their field research. You may need to use one or the other of these methods in your mini research project assignment MS 002. Our suggestion is that you need to include in the discussion of methodology of your project report the methods you have used and also provide the reasons why you have opted to use the same. Do select from further reading and read more about the methods you decided to use. Further reading is available by Varnes, Physical and Social Kinship Philosophy of Science, Veena Das, Contemporary Methods in Narrative Analysis, Qualitative Methods in Mental Health Research, National Institution Advanced Study, Juliet, and Rory Williams, Collecting Life Historians, Ethnographic Research, A Guide to a General Conduct. Shobhita Jain, Participatory Approach, Type of Participation, Constraints and Problems of Participation, The Rhetoric of Participation, Leveling the Playing Field, Recognizing Local Know-how in Participatory Forest Management. And Jain, Shobhita and Nidhi Bhargava 2001 on Participation, Philosopher, Nature and Approach, Operationalization of Participatory Process, Data Collection Techniques for Mobilizing Participation, Techniques of Data Analysis and Modes of Analysis Units in MR R02 of Participatory Management of Displacement, Resettlements and Rehabilitations, and Steinqual in Interviews and Introductions to Qualitative Research Interviewing, Sage, London, for interview methods especially, page 1 to 110. Mukherjee, N. Mukherjee, Participatory Rural Appraiser Methodology and Applications, Concept, New Delhi. And Van Velsen, 1967, The Extended Case Method and Structural Analysis, The Craft of Sociological Anthropology, Social Science, paperback, London, by S. Epstein. This is the end of the chapter, Unit 25. Thank you very much.